The sun began to set over the bustling streets of Seville in the year 1557. Merchants scurried through narrow alleys, bartering goods for gold and silver. But beneath the vibrant facade lay a creeping anxiety. A clinking sound of coins echoed as some shop owners began to clip the edges of their silver reales, trimming away precious metal for personal gain. The king's treasury was running dry, and the currency that once promised prosperity was now perceived as fragile. Confidence was waning as inflation grew, revealing the whispers of an empire's downfall, a tale all too familiar in the annals of history. Through centuries of incredible wealth and power, empires do not falter randomly, they follow a perilous cycle defined by monetary collapse. Today, we will explore 8 significant instances of currency debasement that crippled historic empires, delving into their shared threads and inevitable consequences. By understanding these patterns, we can better read the warning signs of instability in modern financial landscapes. The first stage often begins with what can be described as the rise of sound money. Empires start strong, fueled by a stable currency that embodies the trust of its citizenry. At the height of the Spanish Empire, the Spanish dollar became the most widely circulated currency in the world. In 1556, the Spanish crown minted the first 8 reales coin, also recognized as the Spanish dollar, which was composed of 92.5% silver, a measure of confidence valued globally. This currency was the lifeblood of trade, extending not only across Europe but also into Asia and the Americas. The tide seemed to favor Spain, as the influx of silver from New World mines led to expansionist ambitions. However, with great power comes great debt. The Spanish Empire, in its bid to maintain dominance and secure grand territories, fell into the trap of debt-funded expansion. The crown borrowed massive sums from foreign lenders, particularly the Fugger family of Germany. By the late 16th century, it's estimated that Philip II of Spain accrued debts totaling around 36 million ducats, a staggering amount for the time. The allure of increased territories could not turn back the clock on the empire's rising liabilities. Public confidence began to show stress, but the worst was yet to come. As pressure mounted, the Spanish monarchy resorted to debasement, the art of reducing the precious metal content in coins. The first major debasement took place in 1566, when the silver content of the real was reduced to 90%. By 1598, during Philip II's reign, this content decreased further, down to 60%. This tactic, while momentarily relieving the treasury, sowed seeds of distrust among the population and international traders. The currency burdened by these successive reductions would soon lead to economic chaos reminiscent of the downfall of the Roman Empire, where reliance on an unstable currency further corroded public faith. Transitioning to the mechanism of loss of confidence, we observe a familiar pattern manifesting itself in various historical contexts. For the Spanish, the indirect effects of debasement created rampant inflation, undermining the purchasing power of the populace. The silver glut from the Americas meant that the supply far outweighed demand, leading to soaring prices. As real wages fell, the impoverished majority took to the streets in rebellion. It mirrored the disruptions witnessed during the fall of the Roman denarius, which lost value due to oversupply and over-reliance on debased coins, marking a crucial intersection of debt and confidence that played out through the ages. As the Spanish Empire began to drown in the errors of its monetary policies, we observe in the late 17th century how the situation deteriorated further. Spain's loss of control over its currency paralleled evident crisis at the helm of its power. In 1667, trade with the colonies was monopolized and deemed unreliable, leading to the erosion of confidence in the dollar internationally. The Spanish crown's attempts to print more currency without tangible backing were efforts to stave off financial collapse. However, they had the opposite effect. The empire's currency was viewed as unreliable, and by the turn of the century, the international community shifted its trade towards the more stable currencies of the Netherlands and England. Amidst the Spanish dollar's descent, we witness a strikingly similar scenario played out in the Weimar Republic during the early 1920s. After World War I, the German government was burdened by massive war reparations, leading to desperate measures that echoed debasement. The German mark was printed in staggering amounts, peaking in late 1923 at a staggering 4.2 trillion marks for $1. These measures led to hyperinflation that would decimate saving accounts and dismantle the middle class overnight, consuming the once powerful republic. The third stage of currency debasement sees the decline of a once respected reserve currency as confidence unravels, revealing a vivid parallel with the British pound in the aftermath of World War II. The British Empire, which dominated world trade, faced debts that eclipsed its economic capabilities. By 1944, the Bretton Woods system emerged, seeking to stabilize currencies worldwide. However, the British pound's resilience eroded as the US dollar became the preferred global reserve currency. By 1967, the pound had to be devalued, wiping away decades of economic supremacy. What follows often is the collapse and reset, an event reminiscent of a clock striking midnight after a long, fraught evening, leading to a new beginning amidst the rubble of a defunct currency. For the Spanish Empire, this came in the form of loss of dominant trade routes and colonial possessions by the end of the 17th century. With revolts and economic impotence, the empire that once held golden spectres of power faded into an epoch of stagnation. Which empire do you think we are most like right now? Tell me below. Reflecting upon these patterns, we notice that every collapsing empire has clung to a false belief, the notion that they are exceptional, untouchable by the trends of history. The Spanish, much like the Romans, and later the Germans, consistently believed that their unique circumstances exempted them from the devastating consequences of debasement. This misguided belief often serves as a precursor to downfall. In the words of the historian Edward Gibbon, the decline of Rome was the result of a series of decisions and misjudgments that came to reflect a growing disinterest in the principles that once sustained it. So, as we draw connections through time, the gears of this monetary cycle showcase a movement akin to the tides, inevitable and dictated by underlying forces. Understanding this cycle allows us to read the warning signs. Countries that expand debt in an attempt to supercharge growth, weaken their currencies through excessive currency issuance, and cling to beliefs of exceptionality will inevitably find themselves treading an old and well-worn path toward collapse. The circular nature of these events offers a sobering reminder: within every empire's ledger lies a reckoning that outlasts every flag or currency. These stories of currency debasement unveil a persistent truth: the decay of confidence is universal, a ghost haunting every advanced civilization. As new economies rise and others falter, understanding the mechanics behind these cycles provokes contemplation on how we, too, might navigate the continuing echoes of financial history. History does not repeat, but the money rhymes. Subscribe for the patterns that outlast every empire, and tell me below which collapse you want decoded next. As we delve deeper into the narrative of monetary debasement, we can observe the reverberations of these economic tragedies across various empires, each carrying distinct but interwoven lessons. The Spanish Empire's reliance on imported wealth ultimately sparked a chain reaction that led us to the next pivotal instance, the Ottoman Empire and its struggles in the latter half of the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire, which at one point spanned 3 continents, faced an insurmountable financial crisis by the 1870s. The empire had taken on substantial foreign loans, primarily from European creditors, to fund extensive modernization and military campaigns. By the late 1870s, the debt had ballooned to approximately 200 million francs, a precarious state of affairs that sowed discord within its economic fabric. In an effort to alleviate this debt, the Ottoman government resorted to currency expansion, essentially printing more notes without the appropriate backing of gold or silver reserves. The Ottoman lira, once a respected currency, rapidly depreciated in value, driven by inflation rates that soared as high as 80%. As inflation eroded purchasing power, the immediate aftermath saw a spike in civil unrest among the populace, as rising prices for basic goods became unsustainable. This wave of instability was reminiscent of the debasement of the Spanish dollar and the erosion of trust in any currency losing its tether to tangible value. The erosion of the Ottoman currency can also be matched against more modern phenomena, such as the fiscal policies enacted in Zimbabwe in the early 2000s. Faced with political strife and land reform policies that decimated agricultural output, the government turned to the laxative of money printing. The Zimbabwean dollar quickly plummeted. By November 2008, hyperinflation reached an astonishing 89.7 sextillion% month-on-month, rendering the currency utterly worthless. Citizens faced the dire necessity of carrying bags of cash merely to purchase a loaf of bread. the parallels between the Ottoman Empire's financial missteps and Zimbabwe's monetary catastrophes reveal similar dynamics wherein overextension and a failure to acknowledge economic limits led to ruin. As we continue our exploration of currency debasement, we arrive at the story of the Ming dynasty in China, a powerful nation that faced substantial struggles with its own currency in the 16th century. The Ming emperors, particularly in the late 1500s, adopted a loose monetary policy to accommodate the growing trade networks propelled by immense silver imports from Spanish colonies. This influx initially seems like a boon, but its consequences were far more complex. As the Ming dynasty increasingly relied upon silver, the proliferation caused inflation that diminished the precious metal's value in everyday transactions, spreading through the economy like a virus. By the early 17th century, historian estimates suggest that silver accounted for 80% of all transactions. With excessive silver diluting its value, merchants and traders found themselves at an impasse, as ordinary citizens began hoarding their silver in anticipation of further devaluation. The currency upheaval culminated in social unrest and was punctuated by the peasant uprisings that eventually led to the downfall of the Ming dynasty in 1644, revealing another example of how truly great powers can falter when their currency systems lose credibility. Furthermore, we can observe a dramatic scene play out with the collapse of the French assignat during the French Revolution. Initially issued in 1789 as a form of paper currency backed by confiscated church properties, the assignats saw immense popularity. However, the revolutionary government soon overissued these notes in a desperate bid to finance military campaigns and social reforms. By 1796, inflation wreaked havoc as one assignat had lost 99% of its value. As citizens awoke to the harsh reality of their financial despair, unrest brewed in the streets of Paris, echoing the discontent seen in prior empires as they too wrestled with the painful experience of losing confidence in their currency. This catastrophic decline of the assignat would pave the way for a potent lesson: whenever a government sacrifices the stability of its currency for short-term economic relief, a deep-rooted ailment festers, often culminating in social upheaval. The French assignat serves as a stark reminder of how the printing press, rather than being a panacea, often acts as an agent of destruction when left unchecked. As we now approach the pinnacle of our examination, it is insightful to reflect upon the Soviet Union, particularly in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Soviet ruble, a currency that once symbolized the prevailing communist ideology, had begun its downward spiral amid Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika. The Soviet government found itself overwhelmed by inefficiencies and rising debts attributed to post-Cold War economic realities, leading to drastic reduction of the ruble's purchasing power. By 1991, most estimates suggest that the ruble had lost approximately 80% of its value within a year. In an effort to combat the massive fiscal deficits, authorities attempted to print money without real backing, triggering hyperinflation. Citizens lined up at banks, only to find their life savings reduced to fractions of their former worth, much like the aftermath of the Weimar Republic. As the ruble fell, it heralded the end of an empire deeply mired in an ideology that had failed to adapt to changing economic realities. One striking aspect of these examples across various empires and periods is how strange it may seem to observers at the time, as each authority deluded itself into believing that their currency would remain strong despite the evidence to the contrary. The ingrained belief in exceptionalism, the idea that one circumstance makes one immune from monetary realities, is a telltale sign of fragility. In each case, rulers embraced the hope that their unique situation could allow the abandonment of fundamental economic principles that govern stability and trust in currencies. Herein lies the core lesson: the crisis of confidence is not ephemeral, it adheres to a deep-seated corrosive pattern. As we trace through history, from the Spanish dollar to the Ottoman lira, the Ming silver, and the French assignat to the Soviet ruble, an intricate tapestry reveals itself. Each incident interconnected, echoes a cycle where expansive ambitions are weighed against the immutable laws of finance and economics. In our contemporary context, many nations exhibit similar behaviors, evoking cautionary tales from the past. As global debt levels soar into the trillions and central banks adopt unprecedented measures of quantitative easing, we find ourselves standing upon a precipice. Governments worldwide issue substantial debt while devaluing currencies, echoing the missteps of bygone eras. History reveals that currency debasement acts like a clock ticking towards its inevitable midnight. Understanding these patterns allows us to heed the warning signs: when debts multiply far past manageable limits, when reliance on money printing arises as a solution, and when the belief in exceptionalism confirms an absence of foresight, we must recognize the specters of despair that have routinely haunted civilizations. As we reflect on the multifaceted narratives entwined in the cycle of currency debasement, we gain invaluable insight for our present and the future. Today, as we tread through a landscape shaped by both history and the tide of emerging economies, let us not forget that every conclusion heralds a beginning, a cycle waiting to re-emerge, and a lesson waiting to be learned. Thus, as we observe the swirling currents of finance and economics, one truth remains immutable: the ledger doesn't lie, and the ghosts of the past reveal patterns that we must regard carefully. The teaching lies not just in their rises and falls, but in the enduring understanding that money, ultimately, reveals the sentiment of value, the great equalizer, unraveling or reinforcing the stability of empires through the pages of history. Indeed, as we seal this chapter, the reflections on our cyclical existence remain crucial. History does not repeat, but the money rhymes. Subscribe for the patterns that outlast every empire, and tell me below which collapse you want decoded next.